Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Saturdays with Dad. And what is today's video, Dad?
These are the my favourite albums between the years of 1975 to 1979. We split these up simply because the 70s was such a defining decade that we could have been there all day, so we had to split things up. I think you'll find possibly the way I'm going in this last part of the 70s, because we had then the introduction of punk rock and new wave music. So without further ado, Neve?
Let's go. So there's less prog in here, isn't there?
Yes, there will be.
Alright, so let's start with 1975.
Yes. This is Initiation by Todd Rundgren, and this would, for me, vie between that and Wizard of True Star. Wizard wins it simply because the second side of this album I didn't like too much. For me, it was just overcomplicated. But the first side, Real Man, the actual track Initiation, and I think the last track, I think it's Fair Warning.
Yeah.
Just Todd at his absolute finest. And so I had to put this one in. Todd Rundgren, Initiation. Right, I'm going to let you into a secret. This album was actually made in 1974, but because I forgot about it and I consider it such a crucial album, I put it in this. So most people know Randy Newman for Toy Story and all the wonderful songs he wrote in Toy Story. But if we go back to his career in the 70s, he made one of the most beautiful forms of Americana and music. This is Good Old Boys. It's basically based on the life of the Louisiana governor Huey Long, who lived an amazing life. I won't go on too much about it, but his representation of the life of Huey Long in music is absolutely wonderful. And during the terrible hurricanes and storms New Orleans had, and they had a benefit concert, he played Louisiana in that, which just moves you to tears. He is so wonderful, Randy Newman, and in this album, I think is the best. So this is Good Old Boys by Randy Newman. Again, a story attached to this album. I used to work in Wimbledon in the mid-70s, and I used to get all my albums from a shop, a record shop up the road in true 70s style. And I think I got a call from them saying that I'd ordered Adventures of Panama Red by New Riders. So I went in and I knew the guys. Everybody out there knows, used to talk to people, and it's a great meeting place. And they all had the same kind of music taste as I had, which was extraordinary. All massive deadheads, and they liked West Coast, Airplane, Quicksilver and things like that. And they said they hadn't actually got it yet, but what had arrived, it was this album. And one of the guys there said, you have to get it. I'm not trying to sell it. This is just a wonderful album. So I went into the booth and I listened to the first two songs on it, came out, and I thought, wow, I'll buy it. So I bought it. I've never, ever regretted. A lot of people would consider Will the Circle Be Unbroken being their defining album, but this one is a absolute classic. It's a ripper, which is great because my favourite song, Rippling Waters, is on that. So this is Symphonium Dream. This is by the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Wonderful album. Amongst my other loves, as with the whole plethora of music, is German electronic music. And I think in the last one we did Phaedra, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But I also have to put the two albums. This one just goes over the 74 period. This was made in 1975. It's Rubicon. And this is also an absolute wonderful album. And an absolute must, I think. Rubicon by Tangerine Dream. Well, I suppose for me there wouldn't be any best of without having this band in.
What about the 80s?
Yeah, well, the 80s is a different story, but the Grateful Dead, Blues for Allah. I love the Dead, well, everybody knows that, and particularly the 70s and 60s Dead. And this album there are other great albums. I think they made an album called Terrapin Station, what I don't think they did, which was very, very proggy.
Yeah.
One side of very prog. I think the orchestration was done in London by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. But this is the one I love, the feel of this. Franklin's Tower rather. This is, Help on the Way. This is very, very jazzy and very, very good. And this sort of exemplifies a great musician of this, tumultuously beautiful group. This is Blues for Allah by the Grateful Dead.
Now we're moving into 1976.
Yes. The greatest band ever to be on that disastrous show, which is called the Eurovision Song Contest. And I only love them the only reason why I would not want to get rid of it for eternity is because of one band, Abba. They came on, they won the Eurovision Song Contest with Waterloo, and they became the amazing band that they did. I mean, they are wonderful, and this album is my favourite album of theirs. It's got some great numbers on it. And let's face it, if you say you don't like Abba, you're lying, because they're just wonderful. And the actual track Arrival on that is lovely as well. I think it's the instrumental on that, but I love this album. Abba, Arrival. So I can't really go away totally to what I like in the way of prog music and things like that. So there were the champions to me of later 70s prog, and I think in that case it was Rush who carried up the mantle. This is my favourite album of theirs, 2112. All right, I actually like, believe it or not, one of their albums in the 80s with Tom Sawyer on that. But this one here, this is an essential album. This is Rush, 2112. A lot of people will say, yes, the Berlin years were fantastic, and of course Low and Heroes and things like that were absolutely amazing albums and things like that. But to me, was the album that sandwiched itself between young, sort of the young Americans kind of feel, and also the German feel, which was, this is the album, Stations to Station. This marked to me something that I'd not listened to before. It was so defining, this album, because, you just look at the people that love this album. They're mainly all new wave artists, but Station to Station, the actual track, is just incredible. And I think it's Carlos Almalova, who's the guitarist in that, is just wonderful. Wild as the Wind, TVC 15. This to me, and of course Golden Years, this to me is, just for my taste, David Bowie's finest moment. This is total genius. Station to Station, David Bowie.
Okay, now we're going into 1977.
Oh yes, there was one of your replies on your video going on, why isn't, in the last one, saying, why isn't Can't Buy a Thrill on it, on your top 70s albums? Why haven't got any Steely Dan? I have got Countdown to Ecstasy. I have got Can't Buy a Thrill, but to me, my favourite Steely Dan album is this one, Aja, and it's got some majestic songs on it, like Peg and Josie, and Deacon Blues. This is, to me, my favourite Steely Dan album, Aja. So I'm a great fan of German 70s electronic music, whether it's Kraftwerk, whether it's Tangerine Dream, whether it's experimental like Can or Amundul, or indeed the great Ashra Temple. And from Ashra Temple came this chap, Klaus Schulze. I think that this album, Mirage, right, is the greatest electronic album ever made. And I mean ever made. This was composed and recorded in 1977. I think it was just after Klaus's brother had died a tragic death. And so there's a lot of sentiment in it. There's a Crystal, I think it's Crystal Lake, and it's just wonderful. I mean, if you listen to the Crystal Lake, it sounds like he composed it on a trip through the Loreleys, and it was during the winter. And if you listen to it, it's so delicate and beautiful that it's so wintry, and it's just so wonderful. It is a majestic album. And as I say this, you know, and I'm not holding back, to me, it is the greatest electronic album ever made. This is Mirage by Klaus Schulze. So we're now sort of coming into the punk kind of new wave kind of feel. For me, I wasn't so much into the punk thing. I like some of it, and it's, you know, you can take it and leave it, and, you know, but you have to pick through all the different bands and the different tracks and the different albums to come out, and then somehow, somewhere, comes out an absolute cracker of an album, and this is the one. The New York band Television and Marquee Moon. This to me is defines the late 70s. Tom Verlaine, what a guitarist. I think his hero was John Cipollina of Quicksilver Messenger Service. Not a bad hero to have. And this album is majestic. It went completely under the radar with the obsession in this country, at least, of sort of like the Jam, the Sex Pistols, the Buzzcocks, all these things. But this New York band made this great album, and it still stood the test of time. It's an essential album, and an album that defines sort of like post-70s, 80s music. So I'll definitely get this. This is Television, Marquee Moon, Animals, Pink Floyd. I have this thing about Pink Floyd. I love them. I adore them. But I sort of kind of like the 60s and early 70s, you know, the Atom Heart Mother, you know, all the albums like Medal, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here. So post 75, the one album that stood out to me that they made was Animals. I loved it. To me, it's like a throwback to early Pink Floyd stuff.
Yeah.
I think Neve would probably agree with me on that. And, you know, I'm just a huge Pink Floyd fan. This is such a great album, split into different animals. But, I mean, I just love it. And also the album cover, Battersea Power Station. It's marvellous.
Back to punk.
Oh, yes. If you asked Joey Ramone to come up with a song that was his longest song, I would say it would be no more than 3 minutes. But in those 3 minutes of complete energy comes brilliance. I'm sorry to say, yes, it's another American band, which, you know, I love American music anyhow. And this album is pure brilliance. Everything. Sheena is a punk rocker, the whole lot. This sort of started all the other new wave bands to follow. And there are loads and loads of tracks on this, and I think looking at them all, they all range from 1 minute 57 to... Ooh, there's one that's nearly 3 minutes. But what a great band, essential album. And it's the Rocket to Russia, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's just a great album. So this is Rocket to Russia by the Ramones. Ooh, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Early Emerson, Lake and Palmer, like Pink Floyd, early 70s Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I believe was their finest. But I love this. This is Works 1. And this is probably the last ELP that I can say I really liked, because like all of my favourite bands, they all went, I won't say another way in the 80s, but this one is fantastic. And again, Keith, Greg and Carl all at the top of our game, and it's a wonderful album, and this is Works 1 by Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
We have nothing for 1978, but we have a couple left for 1979.
Yeah. So this is the beginning of one of the greatest... I'm going on about American music a lot, but this is the beginning of one of the greatest parts of English music, and I think it's exemplified in this band, albeit due to the tragic death of Ian Curtis. I wish very short. So this is the first album, it's Unknown Pleasures, and again, it's so groundbreaking that people didn't really understand it when it first came out, and it's only now that you hear people go, "Oh, that Joy Division, they were really good." They were groundbreaking, and this album it's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I urge people, if they start listening to British new wave music of the late 70s and early 80s, start with this album, because this is absolutely wonderful. It really is.
This is a special edition, that's why the colours are inverted.
Yeah. So this, she lost control and things like that. It's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Last, but certainly not least,
The 70s closed to me with a massive bang in the form of The Clash. And the Clash had been around for a long time, since 1975, 76. First album, fantastic. Second album, Give 'Em Enough wrote, fantastic. But this album has everything on it. It's got jazz, it's got rock, it's got punk, it's got reggae. It's almost got sort of like some Phil Spector sounds attached to it. This is their finest album. I love Give 'Em Enough Rope and the first album, but this one, to me, London Calling by The Clash, the title track is wonderful, but there is so much other stuff underneath that song rather, which is absolutely fantastic. And this album is a must in the 70s, best of the 70s for me, London Calling by The Clash.
And that concludes the 70s decade. Any final thoughts?
I enjoyed doing the 70s because, as we said at the beginning of the last week, it was such a defining decade because so much stuff has come out. And I could be going on about all sorts of other stuff like Earth, Wind and Fire, the Bee Gees, and things like that. And also the disco sound of sort of people like Donna Summer, which I liked, and obviously Aretha Franklin. But there was so much going on, the Carpenters as well. But it's sort of music kind of changed right at the end of the 70s when we went away from the punk sort of sound, original punk sound, and then we went into sort of more of electronic new wave sound, which we will discuss when we do the 80s albums.
Until then, tomorrow I've got a video planned as well, but I'm not going to spoil it for now. But see you tomorrow and see Dad next week.
Have a good one. Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye.